Welcome back to Channel Water. Today we're going to talk about family fluid dynamics, and that specific subject is about your family, every family. What is it that structures it, how it affects you, and what is that river you're born into? What is the dynamics within that fluidity of the family? Consciousness is a liquid. It's like one big ocean of consciousness. And in that ocean there's many movements. And those movements are the many different characters. And then each family carries those characters into the real world, and you're born into that. So let's talk about that and how it affects you. Each person's lifespan, the lifetime you spend in this body, is the journey between the moment you're born, which is the rain falling down. That's the moment you enter this material world. And then the end of that is when you go back to the ocean of consciousness that clouds the atmosphere. In between those 2 points, there's a river. And that's your journey. That's your personal journey between those 2 points. We are born into existing rivers, usually. And those rivers have been carved for thousands of years by generations before us. We do not control the moment we enter or the moment we exit. And most of us don't even control the journey, because the river dictates to us the movements, the turns and twists we're going to take. But the reason we're talking about this today is to help you take control over that journey and possibly carve a new way, a new river, a new path that fits better who you are and what your original movement is. You enter your family's river at the moment of union between your parents. Your journey actually starts in the womb. In that first moment, you are already within that movement. In the womb, you are already affected by your parents, their relationships, and their patterns altogether. In the womb, we are conscious, we feel everything, we know everything. And the younger you are, the more things affect you. The older we get, the less things affect us. So you can see with any person you talk to, the earlier the events that happened in their life, the more it affects them later on in life, and the more it becomes part of their identity and pattern. So that starts in the womb. So that's the moment you enter the family river. When we are born, we're born into our parents and a certain environment, and we think that they are in control. They choose their behavior, they choose their path, and we think that they are the people that affect us directly. But they are part of the river. They have been shaped by that river. Most likely they don't have a lot of control over their actions, their thought. They have been shaped by this river for the majority of their life, and now they just carry it through. So it's important to look at the river as something that predates our parents and their parents and their parents, and really see the bigger structure that we're born into. Let's talk about the fluid dynamics of the river itself. So as the water flows down from the rain towards the ocean, water hits obstacles on the way. And as it hits those obstacles, it has to find new paths. And that path, it's not necessarily the ideal one, but it's the necessary one at that moment. So the water will go around this obstacle over generations and generations, turn right and then left, up and down. And over time, both the new path gets deeper and deeper, but also over time the obstacle gets eroded by the water to a point where it's not even there anymore. So now we have this river that is just taking this path that is not necessarily the best one or the logical one, but that's the one that has been taken generations and generations. Because now that we carve that into the landscape, we have no other way. The water just flows through it. And the more water flows through it, the deeper it gets. So we're stuck in this situation where the obstacles that were there before are not there anymore. Yet we take the same actions, make the same turns, as if they were there. So one of your ancestors at some point came across an obstacle, a difficulty, a traumatic event that reshaped their behavior and their reaction to life, their pattern of thought, and they had to make a new way. They had to find a way to deal with that trauma, to keep going, to live with it. And then, over time, the generations after them adopted that same way, that same pattern of thought. So that is the equivalent of the river to the way we adopt the identity of our ancestors. So now the trauma, the event that affected somebody along the line of your family is not there anymore. It didn't happen to you. Yet we still behave and we still carry those memories and fears in our own life, as if it's happening now to me. On top of that, we created this illusion that those traumas, those new paths, those rivers, we started calling them tradition, heritage, culture, and we started embedding them as something that is good, necessary, something that we have to keep. It's the way that we've been doing things, so we have to keep doing it that way. And that gets in the way of people finding their own path and discovering their own movement and purpose in life. And by that, we end up flowing in the same old river, making the same old mistakes, reacting to things that are not there, and reliving traumas, stress, anxiety that doesn't belong to us. We have never experienced that obstacle. We have never experienced that life. Yet we carry it with us through generational memory that is now embedded in this river. We need to be able to identify the traditions that are not serving us, that are not doing us good anymore. And we need to see that the river became a trap where the water falls down, the rain falls down, and then just by gravity and the sheer forces of nature, of physics, this water is pulled down into this river again and again and again. When we, at this point, have to bury that river, we have to cover it up with sand and start carving new paths and new ways that fit our present time, our present movement, and our experience. The physics of it works against us. The more water flows into this river, the more water it will attract. The bigger it gets, the bigger the trap is now, and the more water will find its way to that same old river. Some of them are good, some of them are not. So that's where we have to be able to see and feel what serves us, what works for us. The diversity we live in today is much bigger than it used to be. So one river doesn't fit all. And the bigger the heritage and the culture becomes, the less it fits all the different individuals that are born today into such a different reality than what it used to be. And the main thing we'll talk about today, and the reason we're talking about this today, is to gain back our freedom of movement. You are a movement, you have your own movement, which is the reason you were born into this world. But then we fall into this predetermined path that says its own movement, and it takes away our freedom of movement. It takes away our free will, and for no good reason. Those rivers were shaped hundreds and thousands of years ago. They have nothing to do with us today. The main goal is to identify and get rid of imaginary obstacles, the ones that are not there anymore. So we can open our eyes and see the reason I behave this way is because something happened in the past, not my past, but it's been given to me through those patterns, by heritage, culture. Our families, they just give us all this baggage and memories and knowledge of the past and make us identify with things that don't belong to us. And it's also in society in general. That's where the heritage and the traditions come into play. And there was a time for it, as society moved very slow. If you were born into a family of farmers, you were a farmer. And that happened for hundreds and thousands of years. So there was a purpose for that. And it was this slow gradient movement. But that's not happening anymore. And at this point, it's not serving us. This generational habit, some people call it generational curse. Those are things that are not working for the individual today, as you need to find your own path. You need to find what makes your movement express itself in the best way possible, which is the key to your freedom and to your happiness. A good example to what we want to become, it's like a tree. A tree is a vertical river where the water flows up and it shapes its own path. It actually uses the soil to build the branches and leaves and find its way towards the sun. So that's an example where the water has control over matter and is the one active in building rather than passively flowing down through matter. So the tree creates its own rivers and branches to find water through the roots and find the sun through the branches and leaves. The first step towards that path is to not have judgment towards your ancestors or the rivers that have been carved over the years. You have to understand that they faced real obstacles, just like you might, and that will shape your life. And they didn't have control over that. They did what they needed to do. And then the generation after them was born into that. They didn't have the guidance or the knowledge, the control to get out of that pattern, out of that river. They couldn't see outside of the river. So by not having judgment, frustration and anger over the situation you are born into, you will find the first step into getting out of that situation. Because usually that is what keeps us inside of that river, is those feelings, the victimhood, the frustration. So be compassionate towards your ancestors. Be compassionate about the tradition you're born into, the culture. There's no point judging it. We just need to see it for what it is. Just to look at it in an objective way. Somebody experienced something in the past, and that shaped their life. And now it's up to you to not identify with it and not carry it with you to your life. And even more, not to give it to the next generation. That's where you really come into play here in stopping this negative movement throughout the generations. If you can't control yourself and improve your life, at least make sure you're not passing it forward. We want to be the water, not the riverbanks. Water is alive. The riverbanks are dead. It's rock. It's dead matter. Over generations, we watched our parents and ancestors become the landscape rather than the water flowing through the river. They became passive rather than the active pathfinders that we are. They became the obstacle rather than the guidance to show you and guide you to find your own path. So now we're becoming the obstacle in our own life and then in the lives of others. So that's why it's so important to identify yourself and to see that you're the water and not the river. You're that spirit that's alive and not the dead matter that limits life. It's not everyone, but you might notice that you have become the obstacle. You have become the judgmental, hateful, frustrated person that is actually in the way of yourself, of achieving the stuff you want to achieve, the potential you know you have. Because you know what you're capable of, you know what you want to do, and you just don't know how, and you don't understand what's in the way. And that's what we have to see. It's this landscape that we were born into, that we become. We lose control, we lose our freedom, we lose our will. And we even believe that we're doing good in doing that. It's hard to escape that until you understand that you're pure water and not the riverbanks and the dead matter. It's hard to do because you are now moved by your emotions rather than your motion, your actual movement, your inner movement. You're moved by emotions that have carved that river, by your parents and their parents and so on. Those emotions are not real and not yours. They're a reaction to a situation, to an obstacle that is not there. But you have your own motion, you have your own movement. And that one is more subtle. It comes from inside. It comes from your gut feeling, and it surfaces up once you're able to clear your mind. But you can't have a clear mind where you're so emotional and stressed about things that don't even belong to you. So let's look at how we can become water, how we can be the flow and not follow. You want to become your own flow, but right now all you do is follow. I want to read a few words to you of what it means to flow instead of follow. So when we flow, we are new instead of old. We are love instead of hate. Acceptance instead of judgment. Present instead of past or future. Action instead of reaction. Outside of our thoughts instead of in their thoughts. Awake instead of asleep. Conscious instead of unconscious. Manual instead of automatic. Calm instead of worry. Peaceful instead of anxious. Courage instead of fear. Independent instead of dependent. When you find your freedom of movement and act out of your free will, rather of following the old patterns of emotional reaction and judgment, all of those things will flip. You will immediately have all those things. But when you don't have control, no wonder you're so anxious and stressful. Who wouldn't be? You're in an airplane with no pilot and you have no idea what's going to happen next. I want to explain to you the idea of the movement and what it is. In the ocean of consciousness, there's many currents, there's many movements. It is a fractal, it is one ocean of consciousness with infinite characters in it. The way it works is to be conscious. Let's say you have something and that something suddenly has a desire and intention to get from here to there. Nothing ever moves without the desire and intention, the will to move, which is a spark of consciousness. So there's an intention to move from here to there, and with that intention I do it in a certain way. So there's a movement. That movement carries the intention and carries a form, a shape. Then when you combine all those things together, you get this character that has a shape, an intention, a form. Like all those things become the thing that you are. You are the manifestation of an intention within the body of consciousness, which is the reason you look the way you look, behave the way you do, as far as your original movement. When you look around you at animals, animals are just pure characters, pure intentions within nature. And that's why you see the extreme of, from a rabbit to a kitten to a shark or a bear. They all manifest intention, and infinite amount of characters and intentions within consciousness. So I just want you to understand that your movement originated all the way back in that abstract ocean of consciousness. And it made its way to you, to the manifestation of your body, which is a complex thing to do in this world. And now you're wasting your life and time adopting movements that are not yours, living your life in friction between them, rather than finding your flow and finding your freedom of movement, which then feels like pure joy. When you're free moving, you feel the joy of life. You can see how your original movement came into this material world, and then it came across and clashed with previous movements which have shaped the path for you to live in. And that friction is really painful. It doesn't feel good. And it takes us away from who we are. So you have the nature and nurture. Here you can actually see the two of them and how it affects you. You're born from nature. Your internal movement, your original intention that became a movement, got a form, and created your character. And then we have the world we're born into, and that's the nurture. And that's all external. So your original movement is internal. Now come the external movements that are trying to reshape you. And again, they give you that last seal on what your character is. So your character is built out of internal and external nature and nurture, and those two are shaping who you are. But only one of them belongs to you. Only one of them is actually you. And sometimes we're lucky. We're born into a nurturing environment that actually matches our nature and original movement. But this video is for people that did not have that were born into a life of friction and that are lost in it and trying to find their way, find their flow and path back to the ocean. I want to give you an example of what good nurture is. So when you have good nurture, you're born into an environment that allows you to find your way. It doesn't give you their structures, their subjective experience. It doesn't subject itself onto you. It doesn't judge you or create expectations. It is just there to watch and see your movement as it's expressing itself. It is sensitive to that. And it's aware of the fact that there's many other characters, many other movements and ways of being. So that's what good nurture is. It's actually built out of no judgment, acceptance, no expectations. And that comes from a place of no fear and no self-judgment. Parents usually are afraid and they judge themselves more than anyone. And if the kids are not going to represent well them and their actions, it's going to make them look bad. And they're afraid to be judged by their own family and peers. So there's so much pressure and so much expectation. And then you know what comes next, the mechanism at work, and how quickly we lose the grace, we lose the love, we lose the acceptance, and all the actions are taken out of fear and self-judgment. Fear and self-judgment creates bad nurture. It creates friction. That's really what it comes down to as the movements collide. All those, the fights, the frustration, the anger, it's like friction, inflammation out of those movements colliding into each other, and that hurts both sides. It slows down the development of those children. It derails them from their original path. And then it creates depression, anxiety, unhappiness, disappointment on the other side, separation. That's when the child starts feeling the separation in life. So you have to see how your movement cannot dictate somebody else's movement. You might be slower than them, you might be faster than them. Either way, it's not good for them. Whether you slow down the other person or you make them move faster than they can and want to. Many times we derail people completely off their own path and we shove them into a box that they don't fit. And then when they don't fit, we just tell them they need to work harder or do better. It's their fault. While their own nature is not made for that path. It's not made for that occupation or whatever it is we think they should be doing. And that's the worst part, when we confuse them to think they're not doing well. When the reality is they need to find that one thing they're genius at, because everyone is a genius at something. We all came into this world with a certain knowledge and ability that's very unique to each one of us. And all we need is the freedom and the space to find that. The quietness in our mind, not having the stress and the anxiety, and then we can find that thing. But from the moment you're born, all you're given is stress and anxiety and the pressure that keeps you away from finding that. Because it's not something you need to find out there. It's something that already exists inside of you. You just need to let it express itself freely out, without fear of being judged by your environment. Because that's usually what happens. That's usually where we're stuck. And again, this is the internal movement. This is your nature, not the external, the nurture. A lot of times we see somebody that's really talented and successful, whether they're a singer, a dancer, in sports, and we think that's out of reach. Like, how are they so talented and how is it possible? And you see them like from a young age, they had a chance to express their talent and make it. But you are not different from any of these people. The only difference is that you see what happens when somebody is born into a movement that matches their movement, or that gave them freedom of movement. You can see how effortless it is. The smoothness of that flow, the ease that they do what they do with. When your original movement matches the movement you're born into, then there's this alignment, and that amplifies it even further. Just like the traumatic river amplifies the trauma and makes it worse, so does the opposite. So use those opportunities and these people to see what's possible for you and what happens when you find your flow. It is effortless. It feels good. It's not necessarily hard work. You could work hard because you enjoy what you do, but it's not the hard work that kills your soul, that stresses you out at every turn because you don't know if you'll be able to do it again tomorrow, or because you're doing something that is not in line with your own nature, with your own movement. You can see that talented people, they don't need to think. It's the opposite. It's a thoughtless action. The thoughts do not get in their way. They just are self-expressing themselves, just letting that naturally come out. In a song, in a dance, as a writer, as a lawyer, it doesn't matter. Like, every person has that one thing that just comes out naturally and manifests itself. That's why it's always hard for talented people, when they ask the question of how they did it, to explain how they did it. Because they didn't have thoughts and words in their head guiding them through it. It's the opposite. They had clarity in their mind that allows them to get through it. Now they're just reflecting back and trying to put words to it, but the reality is, it is the freedom of mind that allowed them to do what they do best. And you need to get that freedom of mind so you can do what you do best. As parents, we need to allow our kids to find their alignment, to find their match, to watch their movement and see what is best for them. And by their account, not by our account. Because we might push a child to be successful in the way that we think it is, money or fame, but they'll get there, they're not going to be happy. The work they have to put into it is not natural to them. So it comes with a lot of fear and stress, not having that comfort and trust in yourself to perform as well the next day, to do as well the next time. It comes with a lot of pressure and anxiety, and to upkeep it and keep going because it was never natural to you. And that's really hard for them because they don't have the safety of just being themselves. Knowing that if I just be myself, I will be okay. It's the opposite. They have to work so hard to not be themselves and embody whatever character it is now they're identifying with and whatever goals they think they need to achieve. So they don't have that ease, the calm, the peacefulness of just being, of being comfortable, of just being yourself. And within that, that's where we start escaping ourselves, and we need to find other ways to deal with our discomfort. Because when you're comfortable with yourself and you're naturally expressing yourself, you live in a state of joy and peacefulness. You don't need any substances or any activities to take your mind away, to escape yourself, to escape the stress. You don't need any of that. You are content, peaceful, and joyful. It's the opposite of having a boring life. It's the most exciting life. You can't wait to wake up or to go to sleep. You enjoy every moment of your life. I want to go back to the river for a minute and understand the extremes between us, the living matter, and the dead river, the riverbanks. It's so important to understand that the river itself, the landscape, it doesn't see you, it doesn't know you, it doesn't feel you. It is passive, it has no intention, it has no will, it is just there. And the actions of previous generations have shaped it into the shape that it's in. Yet we end up identifying with it and becoming it. And over time, we even make it holy. We look at the land itself as something that has value, and we give it importance, and we even start worshiping it. The reality is that we're worshiping dead matter. We're giving it much more importance than it deserves or has, because it actually has no substance to it, no content, it's a sculpture we made. And the sculpture itself is not the object to worship. It is the person that creates it. It's the understanding of the actions and why it was created. And we just have to keep creating. But once we stop, we become as dead as the dead matter. We just become like the river, a passive follower of what? With no substance, no content, no self-expression. We just keep flowing down this river until we pass on to the hereafter. And in that, there's no satisfaction, there's no purpose, there's only depression and stress. So objects that cannot move, objects that are passive, like rocks and books, should not dictate the way to living movements of consciousness. Do you see that something that is dead should not dictate the life of the living? It's the other way around. We are here to gain control over the matter and use it to build our future. But once you give into the matter and now the matter is dictating your future, you have no future. You have nothing at all. You are as good as the dead matter that you're flowing through. So we need to overflow those rivers and find new paths. Find your way. We need that strength and courage and to see and separate between you and what is not you. And a lot of the videos we're making now is to help you do that, to separate yourself from those thoughts that are not yours, the negativity that doesn't belong to you, those ghosts of obstacles and traumas that were horrible to the people it happened to, but it wasn't you. You will have your share of obstacles. You will have your share of traumas that you will have to live through. But with a clear mind, you will live through them easily, and you will know what to do, and you will not pass them on to the next generation. But that's hard to do when you don't even know who you are, when all your reactions are basically the reactions of past generations that you're just mimicking and repeating. When you identify yourself with the river, like the generations before you did, you're not in control. You actually give control away and give responsibilities away. And some people like that, they want that. Then it gives them a different kind of freedom, freedom from responsibility for their actions. So they're not in control, and you're so deep inside the river that you don't see the bigger landscape. You don't see anything. You're just addicted to the emotion and the turbulence, and as it turns right, you can't see the left, and then you crash to the left and you can't see the right, and you go up, you go down. You're so embedded into that river and that experience that you can't see that there's something else. There's something better, different. There's a different path that belongs to you rather than just being subjected to the past. So all the addictions we have, both emotionally, like we get addicted to certain emotions and feelings, and the sadness and depression and the victimhood, and we get addicted to substances and activities, and all of that happens within that narrow vision of the river. And we use all those things to mitigate one another, while for you to actually get out of that situation is to see the separation between you, the water, the living being, the conscious being. You're a conscious being that gave away control. You just gave it away to the river that has absolutely no awareness, no desire. It is only carrying the habits and traditions of the past. It is dangerous to let dead matter be in control of the living. It has no awareness of your movement and your actual needs. It will only bring to your death, to you eventually becoming that dead matter, to go completely unconscious, so unconscious that there's no one there anymore. And many times you meet those people. Now there are the obstacles. It's so easy in life to see when you meet an obstacle or you meet a free-flowing being. And it's dangerous if we all become those obstacles, if we all become that dead end. It is really dangerous. So for us, life is really about taking control over matter. It's water over matter, mind over matter. We need to be able to do that. And here we're taking the first steps towards that. And that's why this whole concept of the family fluid dynamics and understanding the fluidity of consciousness from its original form all the way to the material world and to the human cells. You are not a victim of life. You're a victim of the dead. Nobody is doing anything to you. You have these false boundaries, ghosts of obstacles. None of it is real, none of it is there. But your mind has been conditioned so much to live out of fears that don't belong to you, expectations that were put onto you, and now you're paralyzed. And what's easier when you're paralyzed? To just go down with the flow, not have any sense of control, responsibility, accountability, really becoming an adult and taking control of your life. And just like the ocean of consciousness one day woke up on this rock we call Earth and had to deal with the conditions that are here, so do you. You're born, you wake up into a landscape. The key is to not judge it, to forgive past generations, to see the landscape for what it is, and move on. The faster the better. The faster you gain control over yourself, your own mind, and allow yourself to flow through, the better you will do. But the more we're stuck in judgment and victimhood and blaming anything, others, you will not move forward. You will become the obstacle for your own movement. Your mind will become that obstacle. Your thoughts will do everything they can to stop you from realizing who you really are. And you will think that it's yourself. You'll think, this is my mind, these are my thoughts, while none of it is you or belongs to you. This is something you inherited, you were born into, and those boundaries are as false as matter itself. Before we end, I just want to share with you the bigger picture of what this is, what it's about when we look at the evolution of life, of our own life. The journey we're on is the journey of water as a symbol, the body of consciousness, gaining independence in space. We're born into a union between the spirit and matter, water and matter. This is a union of those two. And that's why we have suffering, that's why we have the problems that we have, because we are in a transition point where water and matter has to work together. Matter brings limitations. Pure consciousness has no limitations. It's that feeling of being pure energy in singularity and freedom of movement, expression, knowledge, all of it. But as long as we're unified with matter, as long as we're in that union, we're not in the ideal state, but we're in a transition point to gain that state forever in space. So the goal is eventually to have freedom of movement in space for water and not be subjected to the elements, whether it's this planet or another planet, the solar system, whatever it is. Right now we're very vulnerable and we're evolving the structures of life to overcome that and to eventually gain that freedom. So you can see how it starts from the individual river to gaining freedom in so many different dimensions and ways. And it really manifests itself both in freedom of movement, of thought, of expression. You can see that over the generations, that's what we keep gaining, different levels and dimensions of freedom. Eventually, the last one will be complete freedom of matter and having that freedom of movement in space in a three-dimensional way that we can't even envision now as a human being. So this is a very new subject to me, and it's something that happened very recently, and I'm just trying to express it as I write about it and work on it. And for now, what I want you to take away from this is really see that you are not the river, you are the water. You are the movement of free will, and your goal is to gain that freedom of movement and create your own path. Separate from matter, separate from the past, have no judgment about it, have no frustration or anger carried through it, and really live your life freely and then joyfully in that way. We need to let those in the past that have passed away, we need to let them go. So you can pass through life your own way. So you can find your own path through this life, from the rain to the ocean, and then you'll just go back to that cycle. And the better of a landscape you leave for future generations, the better it will be for you as you come back and re-experience that again and again. I will make more videos about this subject and, for example, how to overcome addiction and more guided meditations. For now, you can look at the last 2 videos, Overcoming Your Negative Thoughts, which can help you start separating yourself from the river, and the guided meditation is a tool to do that. And thank you very much for watching today. We'll see you soon.